Destiny 2 is finally out, and one thing is clear. It is a far better game than its predecessor. Though there are still shortcomings in the overall design, Destiny 2 is just better. It feels like Bungie genuinely listened to its fans and made a game that feels like an actual AAA experience, rather than just a series of weekly virtual chores. There is one sore spot that fans are still dealing with though: the destruction of their loot. For those who missed out on the first game, Destiny has always been about finding better and better loot. The rarest and most valuable gear, dubbed exotics, were one of the major reasons why people kept playing the game. Players spent countless hours hunting down as many exotic weapons and armor sets as they could, and managing to find them all was something only the most dedicated fans ever managed to do. Then, months before Destiny 2 launched, Bungie announced that players would not be able to bring their gear from the original game into the sequel. Nothing would transfer over. No guns, no armor, no nothing. And that included the exotic weapons and armor that players had spent so long trying to track down. Players were understandably upset, especially considering that Bungie had already promised that their gear would carry over from one game to the next. For many, the news felt like a betrayal. Not only was Bungie contradicting themselves, but it retroactively made Destiny feel like a waste of time for a lot of people. Fans continued to call for some sort of reward, some sort of recognition, but as of Destiny 2's launch, Bungie has yet to introduce any significant rewards for those who played the original game. Bungie's reasoning, in short, was that a fresh start would be better for the game and the community as a whole. Now that Destiny 2 has launched, the question stands: did Bungie really need to blow up our stuff? Or did the developers reset everything for nothing? First things first, from a gameplay perspective, transferring the Destiny 1 arsenal over into Destiny 2 totally could have worked. Some of the weapons may have needed adjusting in order to fit the new 3-slot system, and balancing is always going to be an issue, but overall, it doesn't seem like it would have been all that difficult. After all, the gunplay is largely the same in Destiny 2 as it was in the previous game. Of course, on a technical level, things could be much more complicated. A lot goes into making a gun work, even virtual ones. And without being on the actual development team, there's no real way of knowing if something in the engine was keeping the Destiny 1 gear from making the jump. As far as us gamers can tell, the biggest technical hurdle would have been retexturing and reanimating everything, which is arguably something that a studio as large as Bungie would have been able to handle. Player progression, on the other hand, is where things start to get tricky. Much like Destiny 1, Destiny 2 is all about acquiring better and better loot until players are ready to take on the various endgame activities. Because of this, transferring equipment would never be as simple as just giving players their stuff back. How and when the game would allow players to reacquire their gear is a surprisingly big issue. For example, let's say that Bungie had imported all of the old guns from Destiny 1 into Destiny 2, but players had to track everything down again. That definitely sounds like something that Bungie might do, but not only would searching for the same guns twice feel like a waste of time, creating quests and/or events for all of the returning gear would likely draw development resources away from the rest of the game. Okay, so making players re-find their loot isn't the best option, but it's not as simple as just giving it back either. If Bungie had just given players all of their stuff back right at the very beginning of the game, players would be starting off with a veritable arsenal. It's hard to imagine that the story would have been much of a challenge if players had kicked things off with an inventory full of maxed out exotics. That being said, if the team had held off on giving players their guns back until the end of the main campaign, it could have worked. Not only would it have worked well with the themes presented in the story, but the game already holds off on certain mechanics until the endgame anyways. Players can't access their sparrows until the main game has been cleared, so it would make sense if the same held true for their old guns and armor. But even with a system like that, there'd still be issues. Namely, Bungie's major goal with Destiny 2 is to bring in new players and make the overall experience more accessible. Creating such a clear and blatant divide between old and new players doesn't really fit in with that, especially if the returning fans have dozens of extremely powerful weapons at their disposal. And here's the thing about Destiny 1 exotics. They could still make a comeback. Like I said before, there doesn't seem to be any technical or gameplay reason as to why the older guns and armor couldn't be included in Destiny 2. As the game continues to grow over the coming months and years, the dev team could theoretically bring the classics back. Black Spindle and the Iron Gjallarhorn both had special quests centered around them. Why couldn't they do the same thing again? There could even be mini-events in between larger releases, all centered around unearthing some classic exotic gear. So, with all that in mind, did Bungie make the right call by blowing up our loot? Well, as the video shows, it's not necessarily that simple. At least now, after a few dozen hours of play, I can understand why they did it. Destiny 2 is a pretty clean break for the series in a lot of ways, and the experience is much, much better for it. Just look at the exotics themselves. Whereas the older exotic weapons tended to be regular guns with a unique perk, the exotics in Destiny 2 are much more distinct. Be it the Rat King with its group play mentality, the Sturm's back and forth play with the Drang sidearm, or the Tractor Cannon's alien sound barrier weirdness. There's no denying that the new armaments are a lot more unique than those found in Destiny 1. But even then, I still think Bungie could have found a way to make the old gear work in Destiny 2. Or, at the very least, give players a reward that feels appropriate. The memories shown at the beginning of the story are a nice touch, but they don't add anything to the game itself. Oh, and no matter what anyone says, a single emblem will never replace a locker full of Destiny's best guns. The lack of imported loot also set something of an unnerving precedent. If Bungie is simply going to reset everyone's gear every couple years, what's the point in hunting down everything in the first place? Sure, plenty of exotic weapons and armor drop through normal gameplay, but there are already quite a few that require completing a unique quest to find. Hell, one even required waiting for the raid to launch. If the first game is anything to go by, these quests are only going to get more and more complicated. But will all that time and effort be worth it if our loot is just going to get reset again? All in all, I'm extremely happy with how Destiny 2 turned out. And if our loot stashes had to get trashed for that to happen, I'm okay with it. Destiny 2 was a near universal improvement over the last game, and honestly, that's enough for me. That being said, I don't think it's a pattern that should continue. If Bungie really wants Destiny to be a 10-year platform and not just another shooter franchise, they need to plan for the future. Balancing future games and crafting all that content will be an absolutely massive undertaking, and I don't mean to make it sound like anything less than incredibly difficult. But if Bungie wants players to stay invested, they can't reward hundreds of hours of gameplay with a big fat 0 every time a new sequel comes out. It all depends on where Bungie wants to go from here. If fans had to wait for Destiny 2 to kick off the whole 10-year platform thing, then I think the investments are worth losing our gear over. But if this is the direction the series is headed in, Bungie might come to realize that some players' dedication will only go so far. Thank you all so much for watching. The response to these last couple videos has been absolutely amazing, and I never ever would have expected anything like this. These things have taken off more than I ever could have imagined, and the only thing I can think to say is thank you so much for all of it. If you liked this video, definitely leave a comment down below. I love discussing stuff like this with people in the comments, and hey, if you really, really liked it, maybe go ahead and share it on social media, like Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, all that fun stuff. Hit the subscribe button, do all that. I'm not very good at this part of the video. I'll see you all next time.